Well, first to Libya, where pro-government troops have pushed rebel forces out of recently captured territory near Colonel Gaddafi's hometown with a heavy counter-offensive. And in the capital, Tripoli, which has been a constant target for NATO missiles, there have been reports of further explosions. Well, for more, let's cross live to RT's Paula Sleer, who's in Tripoli for us now. Paula, there were reports of fresh explosions in the capital, Tripoli. What did you hear where you are?
Well, for the 11th straight day, the capital city of Tripoli has been on the receiving end of these coalition airstrikes. There were a number of blasts overnight, loud blasts, coming from the residential area of the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, as well as from his compound district, that is in the Bab al-Azazia district. Now, the mood here, I think it is quite accurate to say, has done almost a 180-degree flip since the weekend when the rebel forces began that almost lightning advancement west over Libya. If it was accurate to say that then people here were feeling nervous, I think that nervousness has now been transferred to the rebels, and the excitement that the rebels were feeling just 3-4 days ago has now been transferred here to Tripoli. Certainly people here in the capital city are feeling renewed vigor. They do believe that their leader will hang on to power, and they do believe that these rebel fighters will be pushed all the way back to Benghazi. And we've witnessed that in the last 2 nights. There have been angry, loud demonstrations just in front of the hotel where we've been staying until the early hours of this morning, people standing there with banners, screaming and shouting and showing their support for Gaddafi.
Indeed, yes, Paula. Muammar Gaddafi's forces hammered rebels with artillery, turning their advance into a retreat. So what seems to be the balance of power now across Libya, as far as you can tell?
Well, the situation here is so fluid. It changes every few hours. That front line constantly moving forward and moving backwards. Although in the last 24 hours, it certainly seems as if the front line is moving more and more backwards towards the city of Benghazi. The latest reports we have do suggest that the rebels have been pushed now to the city of Bin Jawad, that this city is clearly in the hands of Gaddafi's men. It is the last main city before the city of Sirte, which is Gaddafi's stronghold. It is certainly his hometown. And there were initially reports coming that the rebels had actually advanced into Sirte. But now not only have they been pushed to Bin Jawad, we are hearing that they've also been pushed further back to the port city of Ras Lanuf. And indeed, the next city for them to be pushed back to will be the city of Brega. Once this happens, they are not that far from the city of Ajdabia, which is just outside of Benghazi. And if you remember, it was little more than a week ago that the rebels first started making their advance, and there was so much celebration and so much talk that because of the coalition airstrikes, they had actually, after a week of a stalemate, been actually able to advance to that city of Ajdabia. There was a lot of confusion, there's a lot of chaos on the front line with this constant forward and backward movement. But certainly what is becoming more and more clear is that Gaddafi's tactic seems to be to have moved his forces away from the front line, to have allowed them to regroup, and then to have sent them back to face the rebels in small mobile units rather than in these long convoys of tanks. And we saw these convoys coming under fire from those coalition airstrikes. So certainly that is a tactic that seems to have changed, and at this stage it seems to be a tactic that is working. The other big question is the question of weapons, and the light weaponry that the rebels are using seemingly insufficient against the heavy mortars and the Grad missiles that Gaddafi soldiers have been firing at them. The other focal point on the ground, of course, is the city of Misrata in western Libya. Here we are hearing increasingly that Gaddafi's men are gaining the upper ground. We've heard of tanks moving into the city, of reinforcements coming in, and of renewed shelling beginning there.
Paula, you mentioned weapons there, and some world powers have been talking about providing military assistance to the rebels. What more do we know about that?
Well, this is a contentious issue because the international community was of pains to say that the UN Resolution 1973 did not allow for international countries to supply the rebels with weapons. But now we seem to be hearing almost a difference of opinion on that. At that summit yesterday, Tuesday in London, the US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said it was now possible that within the framework of that resolution, weapons could be allowed. We know that France is going to be holding discussions over this very issue. At the moment, what we're hearing, though, is that countries will not not be supplying the rebels with weapons right now, but they could in fact do this in the future. Certainly we know from countries like Britain that from the start they've been pushing for the supply of weapons. It is increasingly clear that the rebels certainly need more than just airstrikes, because if until now the rebels have only been able to advance because of these coalition airstrikes, it begs the question, if more than a week later they're now being pushed back almost to where they began, and the coalition airstrikes have been continuing for more than 10 days, well then certainly it seems as if coalition airstrikes are simply not enough. So the rebels will need some kind of more assistance from the international community, which brings a whole host of new questions in terms of just how far the international community wants to become involved. We also know from this conference yesterday that what has been called a Libya contact group has been set up to look into more depth in terms of how the international community will get involved moving forward. Today, Wednesday, NATO takes control of full military operations in this country. The first country to actually head this contact group is Qatar, which is quite significant because more and more the European powers and the United States are looking for the Arab world to become more involved.
OK, we'll leave it there for now. Paula Slair in Tripoli live for us here on RT. Thank you.